For almost 50 years, two NATO allies invaded the same tiny Arctic island, over and over, and the only casualties were empty liquor bottles. No shots fired, no troops dug in. Just Canadian and Danish soldiers taking turns planting a flag, leaving a bottle of booze for whoever showed up next, and going home. Reporters actually started calling it the Whisky War. It took until 2022 for anyone to draw an actual line through the rock. And the line they drew made history for a reason that has nothing to do with whiskey at all. Hans Island is barely worth fighting over on paper. About 1.3 square kilometers of bare rock in the Kennedy Channel, part of the Nares Strait, the narrow stretch of Arctic water between Canada's Ellesmere Island and Greenland. Nobody lives there. Nothing grows there. It has no resources anyone has found worth extracting. But in 1973, when Canada and Denmark sat down to draw a maritime boundary through that strait, they hit a problem. The island sat almost exactly in the middle of the line. Rather than fight about it, the treaty drew the boundary right up to the island's edge on the Canadian side, picked it back up on the Greenlandic side, and left a gap exactly where the island was. Both countries kept claiming it. Neither treaty said who was right. For a scrap of uninhabited rock, that gap was about to become surprisingly famous. The dispute stayed quiet for over a decade, until 1984, when Denmark's Minister for Greenland, Tom Høyem, flew out, planted a Danish flag on the island, and left a bottle of gammeldansk schnapps with a note reading, "Welcome to the Danish Island." That one visit set the tone for the next 35 years. Canadian forces or Coast Guard personnel would land, take down the Danish flag, raise a Canadian one, and leave a bottle of Canadian club whiskey behind. Danish forces would eventually visit, swap the flags back, and leave their own bottle in return. Back and forth, on and off, for decades, an actual real territorial dispute between two NATO members, conducted almost entirely through military personnel being polite to each other on a rock nobody could live on. It never escalated past flags and bottles. No weapons were drawn, no incidents were recorded beyond the swapped markers themselves. That restraint is arguably the more remarkable story. Two allied nations with a genuine unresolved territorial claim chose for half a century to settle it with liquor instead of leverage. The dispute finally ended in June 2022. Canada, Denmark, and Greenland signed an agreement splitting Hans Island with an actual land border running roughly through the middle of the island. Canada taking the eastern side, the Kingdom of Denmark, via Greenland, taking the west. It was the first land border ever established between Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark. The deal was part of a broader agreement that also resolved the remaining maritime boundary questions in the surrounding Lincoln Sea and Nares Strait, closing out one of the last undefined Arctic borders between the two countries. Two NATO allies had a real decades-long territorial dispute over a piece of rock the size of a few city blocks, and instead of soldiers, they sent flags and whiskey. When they finally drew the line in 2022, it wasn't a retreat or a surrender. It was the first land border two countries had ever needed to draw between each other, closing a gap that had sat open on the map since 1973, settled in the end exactly the way it started, peacefully.